We're going to bring her on now. We have Tamara Rudnev on the line, Konstantin's wife. We understand that Tamara's interpreter is with her because, as we've said, she's obviously a Russian citizen and speaks very little Spanish. So, to make communication smoother, we also have the interpreter with us. Tamara, good afternoon. Thank you for these minutes on Tiempo Policiales here on ATP Stream. Tamara, good afternoon. Thank you for these minutes on Tiempo Policiales here on ATP Stream.
How would you prefer that I speak? English or Russian? Because I have translation into Spanish.
We also have the interpreter here to make it easier for you. No, in English or Russian, whichever is more practical for you. I'd say in English, if possible, so that people on the other side who want to use English can do so. And then we'll translate it into Spanish.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope this can help my husband.
Today, you went to see your husband, Konstantin Rudnev. Let's remind people that he is currently in prison.
Yes, I just got back from being with him in prison.
What condition was he in? Because in recent days they revoked the house arrest they had granted him.
We were waiting for them to grant him house arrest so that doctors could visit him and improve his health. But that didn't go through, unfortunately. And now he feels very bad. Every time I go to visit him, I always try to hold him up. I'm very afraid he might fall, that he might lose consciousness because he feels so bad. I'm always afraid for him, and I feel very, very sad because they did not allow him to be placed under house arrest so he could be treated by doctors and receive the care he needs.
Meanwhile, Konstantin Rudnev has been detained since late March or early April of last year, and he's accused of being the alleged leader of a sect linked to human trafficking. The trigger for this case is Elena Makarova, who came to Argentina, who fled her former partner, a violent person in Russia, to have her child here and live in peace. And then suddenly, of course, with the help of two friends, an interpreter and a friend of her mother, they went to a hospital in Bariloche to have that baby. There were some aspects of the investigation there that were rather sloppy, and they determined that Elena Makarova was a victim of human trafficking. Yes, because in the past, in Argentina, there was a group of Russian citizens, including pregnant women, seeking to obtain citizenship. So they believed Makarova was similar. In the course of the investigation, they came upon Konstantin Rudnev, who was living in Bariloche. They pinned a whole range of allegations on him, and he ended up detained. Elena Makarova spoke both in court and in written filings. She said she was not a victim of anything and gave the explanation we are giving on air right now. However, Rudnev remains detained. He remains accused. In recent weeks, he had been granted house arrest, but later it was denied. A person who is detained, a person who has lost between 40 and 50 kilos, if I remember correctly, and who has serious health problems. That is why they asked for the case to be dismissed, but after that was refused, what was requested was at least house arrest. So now I wanted to ask Tamara, how have you been living these months here in Argentina with a language you don't know, with a partner who is detained, who is accused of crimes that never happened? Because according to what Elena Makarova says, she was never a victim of anything, and he is accused of this. How are you living right now? What are your days like, Tamara?
These accusations are a terrible madness. I always thought this would end at any moment because it felt like a nightmare.
Yo siempre pensé que esto terminaría en cualquier momento porque parecía una pesadilla.
Human trafficking, some people lie.
Venta de personas, algunas personas, todo esto parecía totalmente increíble.
All of this seemed completely unbelievable.
Por completo nuestra vida.
This has completely destroyed our lives.
Llegamos a Argentina para encontrar tranquilidad,
We came to Argentina to find peace for Konstantin, for our family, and we ran into madness.
Y nos encontramos con una locura.
The fact that they can put a totally innocent person in prison with no guilt, no accusation, no evidence, and
Una persona totalmente inocente, sin ninguna culpa, sin ninguna acusación, ninguna prueba, lo puedan meter a la cárcel. Y yo no sé cómo sacarlo de ahí.
I don't know how to get him out of there. I see that it is very common in Argentina for people to be jailed in pretrial detention without any guilt, without any evidence.
Que en Argentina la gente la encarcelan en prisión preventiva sin culpa alguna, sin
I saw that
prueba.
between 30% and 60% of the people who are in prison in Argentina are in pretrial detention without any
Y
evidence.
vi que entre el 30 y el 60% de las personas que están en prisión en Argentina están en prisión preventiva sin ninguna prueba.
For me, this is unbelievable. My husband is
Para
guilty
mí
of
esto es
nothing.
Increíble. Mi esposo no tiene la culpa de
He
nada.
didn't sell anyone, he didn't commit
Él no
any crime.
vendía a nadie. Él no cometió ningún crimen.
And now he is simply dying in an Argentine prison, and I can't do anything for him.
Y él ahora simplemente se está muriendo en la prisión de Argentina y no puedo hacer nada por
They
él.
don't even allow him to receive medical
No le
treatment
permiten
every day.
Ni siquiera recibir tratamiento médico.
He signs papers saying, I want to receive
Diariamente,
treatment. He
él
writes it in
firma
Russian,
papeles diciendo quiero recibir tratamiento. Lo escribe en ruso.
and they don't translate it. They
Y
don't
no
give
lo
him any
tran- y
treatment.
No lo traducen. No le dan ningún tratamiento.
He is losing a lot of weight. He loses consciousness, and they won't let him out.
Pierde la conciencia.
I don't understand
No
what is
lo dejan
happening.
salir. No comprendo lo que está pasando.
They are killing Konstantin with these things, with these attitudes.
Yes, Konstantin has so many illnesses. Doctors already have all the certificates.
Ya los médicos ya
He had a heart attack. He has pulmonary fibrosis.
Él tuvo un ataque al corazón. Él tiene fibrosis pulmonar.
It's a deadly disease. It can't be treated in prison. It's impossible to cure him there.
No se cura. En la cárcel es imposible de curar.
He is in a ward where everyone
Él
smokes,
está en un pabellón donde todos fuman.
where it's impossible
donde
to
es
ventilate,
imposible de ventilar.
and for him, that
Para
is
él
deadly.
Eso es realmente mortal.
On one occasion, he was talking to me on the phone, and suddenly the signal cut
En una
out.
ocasión él hablaba conmigo por teléfono y de pronto la señal se cortó.
I called back, but they couldn't get him to the phone.
Yo volví a llamar, pero no lograban que él llegara al teléfono.
It turns out that at that moment, he was no longer able to stand.
Resulta que en ese momento él ya no era capaz de sostenerse de pie y se cayó desmayado.
He collapsed unconscious. Honestly, I don't know. I'm very afraid because I don't know if I
Y
will
la
find him
verdad,
alive
no lo
again.
sé, tengo muchísimo miedo porque no sé si lo volveré a encontrar
It's
con
the
vida.
fear I wake up with every
Y
day.
es el miedo con el que despierto diario.
All I want is to get him out of prison so he
Lo
can
único que
receive
quiero
medical
es
care.
sacarlo de la cárcel para tratarlo médicamente, pero no lo dejan salir.
But they won't let him out,
Aunque no hay ninguna acusación en su contra.
even though there is no accusation against him.
El caso está totalmente falsificado.
The case is completely falsified, fabricated, and I don't understand why it
Y
doesn't
no
end,
entiendo por qué no se termina,
why
no
it
se
isn't thrown
destruye,
out, because there
porque no
is
hay
no
ninguna
evidence.
prueba,
But
pero
he is
él
still in
sigue
prison.
en la cárcel.
The first judge was Judge Gustavo Villanueva. The judge currently handling the case is Judge Gustavo Zapata. Is it true that the first judge, Villanueva, when he arrived at the hospital to see Makarova, said, "There is no human trafficking case here. Release him. Leave everything as it is because there is no criminal case here to investigate."
Yes, that's
Sí,
correct.
es correcto.
He immediately said there is no crime, there is no evidence, nothing. He closed the case right away and said to release everyone. But the prosecutors gathered the case, went to another judge, changed the victim, or I don't know what they did, and the next day they reopened the case again. And that isn't clear. How it's possible to close a case and then reopen it and drag it on for a year without any evidence. I don't understand it.
In Argentina, prosecutors later build careers and end up, they can become judges and so on. They build their careers even though the judicial branch and the executive branch, the three branches of government Argentina has, executive, legislative, and judicial, are not supposed to interfere in cases. Today we have a government, the La Libertad Avanza government, that politically, and I'm not going to question this, but does treat Russia and China as political enemies. Not commercially, because China is a political enemy, but not a commercial one, but Russia is indeed a political enemy. Why? Because it is allied with the U.S. government, with Donald Trump. And prosecutors, many times, to look good with the government, and so that later the government will make it easier for them to get positions and become judges, often do this. The question is, with Russia as a political enemy of the national government, do you think the prosecutors in this case, when they saw a Russian, made this case up and are now pushing it forward to look good with the government and then maybe receive some favor? Do you think this could be a political favor by the prosecutors to accuse your husband?
I draw that conclusion because there is no basis for continuing to keep him in prison. I'm looking into it and realizing that this is how cases get created. In order to obtain favors from someone, to show that some supposed activity is being carried out. And people's lives are broken. It's unthinkable, unbelievable, and that's really how it is. I learned about so many cases like this, and my husband is definitely a political prisoner. He was a dissident even in Russia. He was always against Putin, and they were always repressing him there. There was a lot of repression against him in the media. And that's why we left Russia, because it's constant public pressure. We arrived in Argentina and the same thing is happening. All they do is copy the headlines from the Russian media, and it's unbelievable, it's unthinkable, but it is happening right now in Argentina. As if no one wants to think. Everything gets copied. For me, it's unbelievable to think that something like this could be happening in the modern world. And in all of this, the one who is suffering is my husband. He is practically dying, but no one cares.
Tamara, do you think, let's see, do you think that if Konstantin were Ukrainian, Swiss, or American, he would be in prison today? If he weren't Russian?
If he weren't a Russian dissident, I think they wouldn't have taken him to prison in Argentina.
preso en Argentina.
because it's a very political case.
Porque es un caso muy político.
I even had suspicions that Putin is trying to influence things here by looking for my husband and putting him in prison in order to achieve something.
Sospechas de que Putin está tratando de influir aquí, buscando a mi esposo y metiéndolo a la cárcel para poder lograr algo.
Because everything is happening in a very despotic, very harsh, very forceful way.
Se está dando de una forma muy despótica, muy dura, muy fuerte.
Were you able to speak with Elena Makarova after everything that happened? What did she tell you? If you spoke with the alleged victim, yes, she spoke after Konstantin was detained. What did she say?
Unfortunately, I have never met Elena. I have never spoken with her.
Desafortunadamente yo nunca me he encontrado, nunca he hablado con Elena.
I only learned about her through the course of the case.
Solo en el proceso del caso yo me enteré de ella.
And the judge forbade us from approaching her or communicating with
Y el
her.
juez nos prohibió acercarnos y comunicarnos.
I can't ask her anything because that is prohibited by the judge,
Preguntarle nada a ella,
by the proceedings.
porque eso está prohibido por el juez.
I understand that this girl also suffered a great
Yo
deal.
entiendo que esta chica también sufrió muchísimo.
They practically took her away,
Y ellos se la llevaron prácticamente.
and her life was completely turned upside
Y
down.
la vida de ella se volteó por completo.
I know that from her public interviews, but neither Konstantin nor I have ever
Lo
had
sé
any
por las
contact with
entrevistas
her.
de ella públicas, pero ni yo ni Konstantin nunca nos hemos comunicado con ella.
So Konstantin, before he was detained, never had any relationship with her, never spoke with her, and didn't know her either?
No, we had never even heard of her, and we didn't know her.
No, nunca hemos oído hablar de ella ni la conocíamos, solo oímos hablar de ella en el juicio. Bueno,
We
en el
only heard about her in court,
Cuando nos
at the courthouse.
arrestaron,
When we were arrested, we didn't even know what it was for.
¿Por causa de qué?
We spent several days in jail without any charges,
Pasamos varios días en la cárcel sin causa alguna. sin
without
saber
knowing
la
the
razón,
reason, without
sin entender
understanding
por qué.
why.
I'm going to ask you a very hard question, Tamara, and I hope you understand. If you take it the wrong way, I apologize 1,000 times. That's not my intention. But the idea is for people to grasp the impact of what is happening to Konstantin. You say he is dying. Did the doctors give you any diagnosis? Did they say there is something terminal, so to speak?
Konstantin has many medical certificates from when he was examined before,
Tiene muchos certificados de cuando lo han estudiado antes.
but the judge does not take any of that
Pero
into
todo
account.
El juez no lo toma en cuenta.
None of it is
No se
considered
toma en
at
cuenta
all.
en absoluto.
The doctors who are in contact, who are speaking with him, want to examine him medically at a clinic, at a hospital.
Que se están comunicando, están hablando con él, que
But the prosecutors do not allow it.
ellos lo estudian médicamente. Ellos lo quieren revisar en una clínica médica, en un hospital.
He has a terrible illness,
Él tiene una enfermedad terrible.
and all of this frightens me very much.
Todo eso me asusta muchísimo.
I don't know how many days he has left.
No sé cuántos días me quedan.
First of all, Tamara, I want to thank you for these minutes on Tempo Policiales on ATP Stream. I'm going to leave you with the last. It's not really a question. Imagine that on the other side you have the prosecutors, you have Argentines who believe Konstantin is being held for this case, and you have the prosecutors who are pushing this forward. I'll leave the last word to you. What would you say to them? The floor is yours. What would you say to the prosecutors if they were on the other side, and to the Argentines who have followed this case very closely and believed that Konstantin was the leader of a human trafficking ring?
I know this problem didn't affect only me, but many Argentine women and families. I know there are entire communities of women who worry about their husbands who are in prison. And I want justice to be restored not only for my husband, but for all the women of Argentina, for all families, for all Argentines. I believe that in no country in the world should a person who is not guilty be put in prison without evidence. I ask everyone, if you have any opportunity to help, please help. Help to free him, help to save my husband. I beg you, let justice not be only for him, but for everyone. It is impossible to put people in prison without evidence. It is inhumane. Thank you very much.
Tamara, thank you very much for these minutes. The only thing we hope is that house arrest will finally go through, that Konstantin will be at home with you. And on the other hand, we also hope that the justice system, in an investigation as weak as this one, where the victim says she is not a victim, where she underwent a psychological exam, where she was subjected to a Camera Gazelle interview, and there were no cracks in her account, where she says she doesn't know Konstantin Rudnev, where she says there is no evidence linking him to a sect or to a trafficking ring and so on, well, please, that justice recognizes its mistake if it made one. Let it keep investigating if it wants, but with Konstantin at least on house arrest, that way he can at least be with you, and you can provide all the necessary care and the doctors as well. Thank you very much for these minutes, and hopefully everything will be clarified. Thank you. One more thing. Look, I've been following this case, and what was supposed to be a huge accusation with a person who was the leader of a ring, and there was evidence and so on, there was absolutely nothing. It's falling apart, like many cases that get opened in this country where prosecutors go around selling hot air, and the prosecutors don't admit they were wrong, and on top of that, they go further and don't grant house arrest. Let's suppose Konstantin Rudnev is the leader of a human trafficking ring, leads a sect, and anything else terrible you can think of. And the guy presents medical certificates. There's a medical board that determines his health condition is serious, that he needs house arrest, that there's no flight risk, that there's no risk of obstructing the case because he's a person who, let's say, has no contacts in Argentina or anything else. Why wouldn't you grant it? In this country, they grant house arrest to a 25-year-old criminal who just killed a girl, and there's no circumstance that would justify it. Yet they grant it anyway. Then they end up escaping from the house, walking around with the electronic ankle bracelet. Or the opposite. They grant house arrest to a woman who doesn't have small children, who has no children, and who is in prison for selling drugs. Why would you give her house arrest? It's happened. She was selling drugs from the house. I mean, they put her in prison for selling drugs, granted her house arrest, and even while serving house arrest, she kept selling drugs. But this guy doesn't get house arrest because you don't want to admit you're mistaken and that the case is falling apart because there's no solid evidence. I didn't want to say this in front of Tamara so as not to offend anyone, but do you know why Konstantin Rudnev is in prison? First, because he has a criminal record. He served a sentence in his country for other crimes, and also because he is an opponent of Vladimir Putin's government. Here the justice system wants to be more Catholic than the Pope, saying, okay, I'll look good with a government that hates Russia, hates China. I'll throw this guy in jail because he's Russian, and then when I need to become a senior prosecutor or continue my judicial career, the libertarian government will give me a nod and appoint me where I want to go. Even though the branches of government aren't supposed to mix, you and I know they do, politics always plays an important role. So they said, Russian, suspected of something, inside. If he had been Swiss or American, this guy wouldn't be in prison and would already be back in his country. Actually, not back in his country, because he's an opponent of Putin's government. So you have a Konstantin Rudnev who, because he's an opponent, is in Argentina. Because he's Russian, they lock him up, and he can't ask his country's government to intervene because he's an opponent of that government and had to leave his country, so he's got everything. He committed crimes in another case. Yes, he served his sentence. Yes. Does that have anything to do with this? And look, the investigation starts with an alleged victim who went to have her baby, Elena Makarova, and she herself says, "I'm not a victim of anything." And do you know why they didn't let the woman continue? Because they didn't provide Elena Makarova with an interpreter at the hospital. The federal police came, the country's elite force, and they were translating on a phone with Google, the way you can do at home. Before, the federal police would say, "There's a Russian, bring a Russian interpreter. There's a Chinese person, bring a Chinese interpreter." They didn't bring one. So this case is falling apart from every angle. It's incredible, but that's the detail. Tamara Rudnev asked, please, that they grant her husband house arrest because he is dying and then let the justice system keep investigating.